I've got a hole in my nose, which I know many of us have, but for some reason when I used to sniff, my face and eye used to swell up, so it was going somewhere in my face. I was so close to dying, my heart couldn't take it anymore. You know, like God's with me. I'm already connected. I was just disconnecting. You know, whether I believe or not believe or want it to be or not, the power's there. My kids know all about recovery and I want them to. And one day they might need a 12-step room. I'm very honest. Well, I live a program that demands rigorous honesty.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction, and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Kirsty. Kirsty, welcome to this episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions, and thank you for being my guest today. Before we get to your introduction, I'd very quickly like to thank everybody who's downloaded and listened to this podcast. There's an ever-growing listenership, and I'm obviously really chuffed that the message is being spread and is getting out there. I'd be grateful if you could quickly give us a review on Apple Podcasts in particular. It really helps spreading the message. It helps me and the algorithms to work our 12th step, and it might help you as well. So that would be wonderful if you could give us a review on Apple Podcasts in particular, but any other platform as well, obviously. So with that, enough said. Kirsty, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Kirsty. Very grateful recovered addict for today. So I'm from Manchester. I'm 35 years old and I'm 18 months clean and sober. And I never thought that was possible, ever. If you'd have told me 2 years ago that I could sit here and not drink or take drugs, it blows my mind. I have to pinch myself that it's possible. Thank you to the 12-step rooms and a God of my own understanding, which I do not understand, but definitely works. I'm clean and sober 18 months. So I'm so grateful for that. It's like a miracle. I'm so grateful to be on here today. Thank you so much for asking me.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get right to it. Our first of the 12 questions is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
My childhood was, it was fairly normal-ish, I would say. So my mum and dad split up when I was young, but I think a lot of parents split up when children was young. I had a brother. My mum had some troubles with mental health and not everything was hunky-dory all the time, but a pretty stable-ish life. Do you know what I mean? And my brother did dead well for himself and wasn't a drug addict. So I don't think anything that happened in my childhood would have made me an addict or not an addict. And I'm not saying that we've not done well for ourselves because we're addicts. I'm saying I don't think anything from my childhood. One thing that really stands out in my childhood is from high school age, I just was always in trouble. There was something inside of me that I didn't know what was, but I needed something and I never knew what it was, and whatever I got wasn't enough. And I think it kind of come out in I'd be naughty, but then I'd be naughty to the extreme. I'd have to and it's like I was filling this void inside with this sort of not even validation from the outside, just reaction from the outside.
Attention.
Yeah, maybe. I got thrown out of a couple of schools and I was really hard work for my parents as a teenager. And this memories, before picking up drugs and drink, the behaviour started before.
How old were you then?
I'd say from hitting high school age, I was probably, as my parents would maybe say, a nightmare.
So before high school, this would be happening?
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we display, some sort of spiritual unwellness in big quotation marks, pretty early on. And of course, not every child who does that becomes an addict. And One of the reasons, though, why I ask this question, it's not because I think or that I'm convinced that necessarily adverse childhood experiences must lead to addiction. And I've said this before on here. Step one is really clear. It just says, we're powerless. It doesn't say we became powerless because of our childhood or because of genetics or whatever. So it's not even about that conversation. I just find it interesting to hear how we were when we were young and if there was any major or minor traumas,
Yes. And when I look back, like, because before when you don't know, do you? So to me, I spent years and years. I knew I had a drug problem. I knew that I could not stop once I started sniffing. That was always an issue from being a teenager and first picking up a line. Once I started, like, I would miss any event or, I could not stop until I literally ran out of money or I was in a bad way with like my heart and breathing. And that was always the case. And I knew that feeling because I would not start sniffing unless I had a certain amount of money, because I knew that I'd need more, that physical torture, which I now know is that craving beyond my mental control, but I didn't know that. Well, for a number of years, and when I first went into rehab, I would have point blank said, I am not an alcoholic. And I truly believed it. And over the years, I'd say to my friends, I don't really drink. And people would laugh at me and be like, you do drink. But that delusion was so deep. And knowing what I know now and the understanding of the step one. So from before I even picked up cocaine, I think I first drank at 13.
Which is our question too. So let's just very quickly ask the question, which is, what did the moment you first got hooked, the fun times, what did that look like?
The fun times was never the drinking. So when I was 30, whenever I drank, I can never remember not drinking until I was absolutely gone, spewing, passed out. And because of this, and I didn't like it. I didn't like drinking. I had my stomach pumped at a really young age. I'd been to hospital a few times and my mum and dad rung, as a teenager, picked up by the police, lost my first job at like 17 because of going in drinking. None of this gave me alarm bells that I had any kind of drink problem, because at such a young age, and this sounds bad, maybe the norm a bit to drink more and go out a lot. And I didn't pick up cocaine for a good few years. I think I was 18 by the time. And I did it because I didn't like being drunk.
Yeah. But your drinking, by the sounds of it, started off being quite problematic from the off, really, even though it didn't end up being the thing that you are most, quote unquote, allergic to, right? But it seems to me, but from what you're saying, is that your drinking was problematic pretty quickly and pretty early on.
Yes. But I couldn't ever see that ever.
And it's normalized, isn't it? I mean, it certainly was normalized when I was a kid. And, because I don't drink, I can't really hold much drink. I never really had to go all the way and have my stomach pumped. But I know that most of my friends did at one point or another. It's kind of normalized.
Yes. And when I picked up cocaine, it was because I seen these people that then wasn't a drunk mess and they wasn't this and I'll never forget the day I had my first line. I can remember the house I was sat in, the people I was with.
Take us there.
So I was sat in a house that I was actually looking after. I used to work in quite a nice restaurant, and one of the customers, and I was only 18, and he'd asked me to look after this house, and it was a big posh house, and I had all my friends round, which wasn't a good idea. It was the state I left the house in, it was not. And I tried a line for the first time, and I remember being really scared. And as soon as I had it, I just knew that was it. It was like first love. I'd say for years, it was always a problem. It always affected my life, but I very much functioned off it for so long.
And did you start taking lots of it pretty quickly, or was it a bit sparser to begin with?
It was definitely less than what I took many years after, but it was always more than what anyone else I was ever with had.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
I mean, I've had I don't like to call them party days, because when I actually think back, I don't think I ever knew what happiness was, or that, until I've got recovered. And when I look back, I think it was all hell. Like, I'm not saying I've never ever had a good time, but if compared to the joy and what actual happiness is to me today, like, it's not comparable.
It's interesting, this, and something I'd like to take up quickly. If I think about it now, there were times where, and this is a personal experience, I think, to every addict and alcoholic, there were days where I was having fun. I'd lie if I said I didn't. I had a lot of fun, right? And there was also, there were times in the beginning where there weren't many consequences, but I was able to stomach them. They were okay. But not everyone has this experience. And from what you're saying, you felt it was problematic pretty much straight away. Am I getting this right?
Yeah. I knew very young that I had a problem with the cocaine. I knew as soon as I took it, I could not put it down. And I mean, I had a full-time job and just moved out with my boyfriend at the time, and I couldn't stop. I wanted to sniff every day, pretty much from the off, and I didn't, because I had people around me like saying this isn't right, but I did a lot of secret sniffing from really early on, like my first year of using.
Yeah, I mean, cocaine is one of those drugs where perhaps, at least at the beginning, it's feasible. You can have a couple of lines and people don't really notice all that much, right? For most people anyway, as opposed to you, because you don't drink, you don't stink of alcohol or anything like that, right? So it's easy to keep it a secret, or easier.
Yeah, and I think I kept it a secret quite well for a number of years. Like, I mean, I couldn't go to family events. I felt like I couldn't go into my job, and like I couldn't really do anything without it.
Like a secret helper.
And over the years, it spun, because the last few years of my using to the first few years, I then couldn't go to work because I was in a fucking constant state. Sorry, I don't know if I should have swear.
No, you're most welcome to swear on here.
I couldn't take my kids to school because I was in an absolute state. So the thing it did for me at the beginning, allowing me to go out and make friends, allowing me to go to work, allowing me to feel like I could just breathe and everything was okay as long as I had that. But it took a number of years. But the last bit of my using, I mean, I stopped using when I was, how old was I when I went to rehab? It was 18 months ago. So there's a big amount of years, and in the change, what it did at the beginning, it didn't do at the end. It prevented me doing all them things. I couldn't then hold down a job. I couldn't hold a friendship.
Before we go there in a moment, let's very quickly think about what it did for you. What do you think it allowed you to do that you weren't able to do for yourself?
Breathe.
Yeah. I remember I got a lot of, in the early days in particular, and I got a lot of sort of positivity out of it almost. I sort of, I didn't realize, I think, how skeptical and how downtrodden I seemed to be without drugs quite a lot of the time, and sort of always so skeptical and pessimistic and all the rest of it. And then the moment I'd use, and for me, stimulants, as I've mentioned many times, so cocaine, but also pills and amphetamines of all kinds, the moment I use that, all of a sudden I'd be like, oh, actually it's not so bad. And, things are looking up, and, look at this, look at that, everything. And all of a sudden it changed my perception to the point where my life that seemed so ordinary and meh beforehand, all of a sudden it looked all right. Things were all right. People were all right. My circumstances were either all right or they were looking up in one way or another. So it did that for me at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, I thought it made me happy. And I like to say thought now, because I think, and that relates to what I was saying at the beginning. I'm not saying I've had no good times, because there is good times, but from what I class as happiness now to what I thought made me happier, two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. So going to our question 3, and I'm aware we're covering quite a bit of time here, but nonetheless, question 3 is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? Now, it seems to have not got in the way to the degree that you couldn't have had a family. You said you have children.
Yes. And I hung on to the fact that, so when I found out I was pregnant with my little boy, I was only 19, and I'd stopped sniffing, stopped smoking, stopped drinking for the full pregnancy.
Wow.
And I absolutely hated being pregnant, and it was unbearable. And I didn't know that was the reason. So I was 2 years into my using, and I always said, he saved my life. Like, I'll never use again. He saved my life. Within weeks of him being born, I couldn't stand that unbearableness. Now I wasn't pregnant. I didn't have this anger and uncomfortable and hating the world. I didn't have all that to blame it on. I spent so much of my pregnancy asleep. I couldn't go out. I couldn't do anything because I couldn't face the world. And then I obviously got pregnant. Then there's an age gap. My little girl is 4 years younger, and that was a lot different. I don't like to say on here because it's probably something my daughter doesn't know and will never know. And you never know when things go on the internet if she'll hear. But, you know, she knows my story. Both my children do. But when I was pregnant with my daughter, I did put the cocaine down to a certain extent, but I didn't manage it. I didn't have the power to not. And I did also drink on my pregnancy with my daughter as well. And today, like, it makes me sad to share that because that's not who I want to be, but I have no choice in that. I literally had no power. That's the disease. And in my delusion, because I'd not sniffed anywhere near what I'd been sniffing, in my delusion, I wasn't an addict because I managed not to sniff.
Yeah. I can hear that the amount of shame that is in there, and it's such an important topic in when we talk about addiction and our using when other people and even people who can't defend themselves, like children, are involved, and we do a lot of harm to those people. But it's important that we talk about it, and I'd like to thank you for being so courageous to mention this. I think that's really inspiring. So if we circle back ever so slightly to that question 3, which is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? So how did it progress until you finally then got into rehab?
The two very different things. Because my worst consequences would have been about 4 years, I think. I mean, my life is a bit of a haze because obviously when you're constantly off your nut, it's hard to remember how many years things were, but 4 years previous, it might have been a bit less or a bit more. My kid's dad is also in the fellowship, and I'd got clean and sober. We'd split up. He'd gone to rehab, and then he really didn't want me looking after the children, and he kept asking me, to stop. And obviously that wasn't a possibility. I couldn't. And I wasn't interested at the time in knowing how he'd got well or anything like that. It was, my selfishness, and people say to me, did you get clean for your children? And I'd love to say I did. My selfishness, I wasn't ready to stop. There was something, and I hated my life most of the time at this point, and using wasn't fun at this point, but there was something that I don't know why. So basically he took me to court. One day he just took the children and didn't bring them back. And we went to court. I didn't see them at all for 9 weeks. And that was really, really hard. And we went through 4 different court cases, and we ended up getting 50-50. I didn't lose them all together. And in my manipulation and lies, I managed to refuse a drug test and get the social workers. I was very good at lying, very, very good. And I don't know. And I look back now and I think, I should have lost my kids at that point. And we got them 50-50, so they lived with us both half the week. But the time going up to that and the court cases, like, I was like, this is it. I have got to stop. And I tried really hard to stop at this point. And I even went to some 12-step meetings, but I'd kind of put cocaine down for, and this is an interesting thing, I think, that I don't really hear a lot from addicts. I had never had another drug. I'd never had like ecstasy, pills, or any of these drugs. It was just cocaine and drink. And then at 30, when I tried so hard to stop cocaine, I started pills, I started cats, because I just needed something. So, but I'm very sick, obviously, at this point, and I'm trying so hard to keep my kids and not sniff cocaine. And my best thinking was to take ecstasy instead.
It sounds really familiar, I have to say. I swapped them the other way around personally. Even though there was quite a bit of time in between, but I swapped cocaine for the other amphetamines, yeah.
Most people do the pills at 17, 18. Like, you don't really hear like at 30, do you? I'm like, it's normally the young. But yeah, so that was probably when I look like not seeing my kids for them weeks and thinking that I'm going to lose them all together was probably my worst consequence. Like, I lost my dad. Like, we felt, well, I chose to cut my dad out of my life, who I was so, so close to. And yeah, which was really hard. And I always had the chance to make friends with him, and he always reached out, but I didn't, because he would call me out on my using. He would say that I'm not looking after the kids. So the easiest thing to do, because I knew that I couldn't stop, was just cut him out. So I didn't have to deal with the lying that I'm not, because I couldn't lie to him. He knew it was blatantly obvious by this point. My closest person in my family knows when I'm using and not. So the only thing I could do is not speak to him. And so that all happened around the same time. And that was probably the worst consequence. And then the rehab, it was just, I had some issues with my heart, and I was in hospital about 6 months before I went to treatment, and I still used again, and I just had enough. My rock bottom wasn't like I had my kids back at this point. I had them full time, because the dad, unfortunately, in all the battle of the fights of getting the kids, he actually ended up relapsing and going back to a treatment centre at the other side of the country. So I had the kids back. And one day I just had enough, and I knew that the 12 steps rooms had worked for my kids. Dad was clean and sober a couple of years again at this point, and I'd seen he was getting his life back, and I just thought, I want that. I want to be a good mum. Like, he was, even though he's living at the other side of the country, he was dealing with everything, with school, with the kids, and my life was just, I weren't taking my little girl to school, and she'd cry, "Mum, please, I want to go to school today," and I couldn't.
That's so hard.
Yeah, and the rehab, basically, I'd tried to get clean in the rooms here, and people do get clean in the rooms without going to rehab. And I was really trying, and that's one thing, recovery is not like that. Today I don't try, because I tried for so long and it doesn't work. I couldn't stay clean on my own trying and my own wishing. And I'd get like a week or, 2 weeks, I think 30 days I got once, and I'd always then relapse. And my kids having that short time of me getting up and, cleaning the house and having a nice tea, and like, instead of how it was, it would then affected them so much more each time I'd pick back up. And I think it was the most rock bottom, the disappointing my kids over and over. Because before that, my addict life was a pretty normal life to them. They'd know no different the whole life until I started trying to get clean.
This brings us to our question 4. Our question 4 is, at your worst, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
Oh my gosh, I wanted to die so much all the time. And the one thing, but I never considered suicide. That is one thing I didn't consider it. I didn't want to exist anymore, but I knew that I could not do that to my kids.
Right. Yes.
So I didn't ever think but I just hated myself. I hated my life. But, I knew that it could be possible to be clean because I'd seen someone so close to me that used as crazy as I did, that I'd had drug-induced psychosis, been in rehab. I knew that it was possible. I just didn't know how.
Now, our question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
So, swapping kinds of drugs was up there. Drinking, smoking weed, sleeping tablets. I thought, well, if I just sleep, then I can't use. And in my delusion, that wasn't using. But I tried things like, I won't go out. I'll get new friends. Oh, maybe I'll get a relationship. Maybe it's time I get a new relationship. That'll work. A new job, not working. Yeah. I used one thing. I'd go and stay at my mum's house. I'd say, right, I'm going to take the kids and I'm going to stay at my mum's house. If I stay at my mum's house tonight, I won't use tonight. Making plans with different people. None of it ever happened.
Yeah. Did some of it work to a degree, or did none of it ever really work at all?
No. And the worst one that I tried that didn't work, so then I'd get to my mum's house and then I'd use at my mum's house, and then I'd feel this horrible kind of way about it, and it'd be such a traumatic using experience, and I'd think, I'm never doing this to myself again. And then I'd do it again, thinking, this time I'll watch a film with my mum.
Oh, God. You're sitting there, hyped up because you've been using, and you're sitting there in a really normal, quiet room watching a film with your mother. I can't think of if anything worse, really.
Yeah.
When you came into the rooms after your rehab, or maybe even in your rehab, and this is our question 6, did you struggle with the word God?
So I went to a 12-step rehab, which I am so forever, ever grateful for. And I knew that the 12-step program was about a God. I'd already known that. And I'd tried going through the steps with a couple of people, and I'd had different experiences. People had said, oh, don't worry about what I heard at the time is, don't worry, God's not involved. It's a God of our understanding. So what I heard at the time and what they might have been trying to say to me might have been a different thing. So I kind of had in my head, well, I can do a 12-step program without God. I'm also ashamed to say, I'd always said to my kids from being little, there's no God, it's no such thing, it's a made-up thing. And the dad's actually Catholic, and they've always gone to Catholic school. And I was just like, it's a load of shit, I was always like that, very closed-minded about it. I had no reason, no, resentment to God, or no experience, a bad experience at a church or anything like that. But what I know today is my spiritual program is very different to religion. And if it is religion as well, great. But yeah, I was always just, that's not true. It's a story they've made up to tell you at school. I laugh at myself now.
Let's slow this down for a second, because I find this really interesting, because a bit like what you were saying, I struggled massively with the word God, and I don't have a particular reason. And it sounds like you didn't have it either. It's not like I was abused or anything, or do you know what I mean? Where you can sort of pinpoint, oh, it's this event or that person, right? And so what I'm hearing is a similar experience for you. You didn't have that either. You just had that thing of saying, God's not for me or doesn't exist, but you don't know why that is.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Yeah, exactly. I had no reason at all, but I was absolutely adamant it wasn't true. And yeah, so I knew that a 12-step program included this word God, and I think when I'd first come into the rooms, when it didn't work, when I wasn't ready, and when it, like, that really bothered me. So I probably zoned towards the people that were saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter, you can skip the God bit out," or whatever I was hearing, at the time. But when I turned up at rehab, and it was a 12-step rehab, and I didn't care about the God word, because I was so, and it takes me back to the question you asked about suicide, actually, because I remember sitting in the car on the way to rehab and thinking, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to die. When I was sniffing, I was so close to dying. I was so, like, my heart couldn't take it anymore. So I kind of knew it was this or die.
You had physical problems because of this?
Yes. Yeah. And also, I've got a hole in my nose, which I know many of us have, but for some reason, when I used to sniff, my face and eye used to swell up, so it was going somewhere in my face. So the end of my using was very physically painful.
It sounds awful. And it didn't stop you still, did it?
No. I used to cry and sniff sometimes.
Scary. Yeah, I hear you. So, our question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power today? It's also a good moment to share any God moments, as it were. But we talked about the fact that you had no reason to be either an atheist or massively agnostic, a bit like myself. But that was your reality at that time. Now, how do you experience your higher power today? Because clearly you found it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sober.
It's the best thing in my life. It's the best thing in my life. And again, I'm a mother of 2 children who I love so, so dearly, and I like so close to that second best, because it is the best thing in my life. My relationship with that power is 1,000,000% the best thing I've ever experienced in my life. And it's the most important thing in my life. I have to absolutely, no matter what, work on that relationship and improve that relationship. And it's the best experience I've ever experienced. It's an experience that's unspeakable, and it just happened to me. Like, I didn't do this, it just happened to me with them 3 things: absolute willingness, which I feel like I got that willingness from desperation of this or die. Like, there was nothing else, there was no time left, there was no fun days left, there was no, it was just like, and that desperation gave me that willingness, and I just did exactly what the book says. I did exactly what a very dear man to me that I met in rehab, he was an amazing spiritual teacher who we both know. I seen in him that he had something within that I wanted. And I knew it was true from that minute. Like, I just knew. And yeah, like, the most important relationship in my life is the one with the power. Because that enables me to be a mum. So it enables me to not use. Like, I can't not use. I have tried and tried and tried. I have sat and cried and cried and cried and not wanting to. This power in my life today, and my faith in it come with the rehab I was at. As I said, it was a 12-step rehab, and we went through the steps with a sponsor in there. Well, sorry, a counsellor it was. I don't think they use that word, but we went home for a weekend after our step 5s. And I went home and I stayed with my mum, because I actually packed up and moved house and everything to go to rehab, and never went back to where I was. So I didn't have a house to go and stay at. So I went to stay with my mum. And I've suddenly realised I've never been in my mum's house as an adult without drugs in me. And I got this horrible feeling, and I wanted to ring my dealer. And the first time in my life, first ever time that I'd really wanted to, and I did. I got on my hands and knees and I prayed to this power, and I kept remembering, fear is faith, and what am I scared of? Fear is faith. And I begged and I cried when I prayed, and it was the first, I'd said my prayers and I'd done everything asked of me, but it was the first honest prayer from my heart, and the first time I felt like I'd actually seeked this power. And I didn't use. I didn't use, and I've never been as shocked in my life. And I got myself back to rehab, and my whole attitude towards this stuff changed, and I just did everything. And that experience of feeling like safe, not having to use, and I was still very unwell. It was no magic quick fix, and I needed more of that. I seeked more and more. And it's daily today. Like I only get this if I work it today, you know.
Yeah, of course, of course. This reminds me of something I'd sort of forgotten a little bit. Maybe a few months into my sobriety, I must have been around step 6, 7, I think, before my amends in any case, and I had sort of glimpsed a bit of, after steps 4 and 5, glimpsed a bit of the light, and sort of felt that the obsession to use was leaving me, and yet it was still there here and there, and I was still sort of battling with my agnosticism and all of that. It's that middle bit, right, where you hop 1 foot in, 1 foot out, you haven't finished your steps and so on. So, and I remember this one afternoon, I was at home alone. I've forgotten about this, actually. I was at home alone, and I felt the ground underneath my feet moving and thinking, missing my old life, missing my old mates, that sort of thing. And realized also that I had been maybe a bit mechanical in my approach to this. And out of sort of nowhere, I got on my knees as well, and I prayed the real honest kind of surrender to kind of go, I can't pretend any longer. I can't do this without a higher power, something bigger than myself, whatever that is. And I'd sort of spent so much time trying to figure out with my head what it was, that I'm praying to. But in the end, that day, that moment, it didn't matter what it was, as long as I sort of honestly asked it for help, and help came. I'd forgotten about this. What a beautiful memory. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And do you know what? And I believe that, I hate to say the word but I believe that, like, it takes that honest, like, I can't just say my prayers. I've got to have the honest desire from within, and the God word that did scare me until the point where it was that or die. And then I would have took God, I would have took any, I would have done anything. But today, like, one thing that probably shocks me most about the spiritual program of action is that God's here deep within me, in my gut. Like, God's with me. I'm already connected. I was just disconnecting. I didn't know how to connect with the power. The power's there, whether I believe or not believe, or want it to be or not, the power's there. It's just whether I'm disconnected from it. And I was so disconnected, so lost. And how does that happen? Is it all the worldly clamours, and then alcoholism just comes in? How and why, I don't try and work out, but the joy today is that I'm not disconnected anymore, and I know exactly what to do to stay connected.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Kirsty. Our question 8, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
None. None. I don't think any of it. My life was frigging difficult. My life was hell. Like, absolutely just threw myself into it with, like I say, like the willingness of a drowning person. And then hand on heart, and that might sound like anyone struggling with any of the steps, like, and I do get phone calls sometimes, and people do, and we are, but my honest experience has been that none of them, because my life was hell, and I just needed to do it. And with each step, I got freer and freer, and today still, my step 10, 11 and 12, I get freer and freer.
Beautiful, thank you. Our question 9, which character defects give you most trouble?
Now that is a good question. Irresponsibility was really big for me. Irresponsible.
How would that manifest? How would that show up?
Like paying bills, taking kids to school on time. Like, it's something I could never do. I'm very irresponsible in life, and I don't know whether it's because I've used my whole adult life and I'm learning how to be an adult with the help of this power. I don't know. But yeah, I can quite easily do things and think that's really irresponsible. That's not what a responsible adult would do. Yeah, I would say irresponsibility, probably judgmental. I can be like, I catch myself today, but I can find myself being judgmental quickly.
Yeah. Of situations, of people.
Yeah. And yeah, I'd say, my journey today, my journey changes all the time. And at a time, I used to get angry at people that didn't love the fellowship or didn't love the program, and that was a block. That was a block for a while. And today, I asked myself, like, so I suppose that anger's been a big one for me. And like me and my kid's dad now are a really happy ending. We actually co-parent so well with our children, and they've like got two clean, sober parents co-parenting. But anger, and that angry defect can come in very quickly with him, even though he's a really good dad and we work together really good with the kids. But yeah, anger comes up probably more than I'd like it to. But what I seem to experience is, on all my wishing and trying, my utter inability to leave alone drugs, I've got no power over them defects. I have to ask. I have to do inventory. There's something magical between, doing inventory, meditation, and asking, prayer.
Absolutely. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
To breathe life, being able to be a mum, and having the power in my life, everything I've got today is down to recovery. Like happiness, knowing what happiness is, peace, like being able to get up and have a coffee in the morning and do normal tasks. Like, to me, that's just amazing.
I think once we've become so incredibly dysfunctional and not being able to live properly, really, in one way or another, sometimes even really simple things can make us really, really happy.
Yeah. Like being a mum as well, being able to be a mum, and that's not always easy, and it's tough at times. And my teenage son is obviously got a lot of anger there for the using days, which rightly, and he's at a age that's going to be difficult with or without being brought up by addicts. So it's probably one of the most challenging things in my recovery, being a parent, but one of the best gifts, because even though I kept my kids for the majority of my use, and there was only that short time that I said before when they was with the kid's dad, but I was never able to be a mum to them. So that's a really big thing that recovery has given me. I can actually be a mum today.
How do you handle potential questions around you using and your past? How do you handle that in front of your kids?
What do you mean by handle? Sorry.
Well, I mean, how do you address it? If your son was to come up and you say he was resentful and angry around the using times and so on, how do you speak to your children about this? Or do you speak to your children about this?
Yeah, so they're both very different. So it's very different answers for both, because my little girl's younger, and she never ever mentions it, but as well as never mentioning it, I've sat her down and asked. They had a lot of support around them, so I was there when I wanted to get clean. I mean, the poor social worker that had worked with me all them years, and I literally said to her, I went into school the day I was going into treatment and said, I need speech. And I think they'd had the suspicions by this time, because they was in touch with dad as well, and she'd had so much time off school. But I went in and I had an honest conversation and told them what had been going on, and because I wanted my kids to have that support there. So she's always had people take her out of school and say, do you need to speak about it? I've said to her, do you want to speak to mom about anything? And she's always just said no, and that's been that. My little boy, on the other hand, like when he has come at me in anger, which rightly so, I'll just be like, okay, like, let's sit down, let's talk about it. How's it made you feel? What do you want me to do? Like, what would help you now? Because what's happened has happened. And I'm really, really sorry. Do you know what I mean? You shouldn't have experienced some of the things you've experienced, and it wasn't right, and it's not okay. What can we do now going forward? Because, and I don't want to say this, but I can't live in that past because I can't, you know. And I was very, very ill, and I used to say for a long time, like, I'll always forget what I did to my kids, but I was ill. I had no choice. Do you know, like, it wasn't a choice. I never chose to do anything. So I kind of try and speak to him as open and honestly and say, do you want me to explain to you, like, because when I'll say to him, like, Mum was really ill, I shouldn't have been like that. And today I know how not to be. I know what to do to stay well. Because I never want to promise him, like, I'll never use again. So I'll say, for me, I truly, in my heart, I know if I do today exactly what I did yesterday, then I'm going to stay clean today. So if I do tomorrow exactly what I did today, how am I not? To me, I'm permanently recovered as long as, and I always share this, I work my program today just as hard, and if not harder, because I'm on a path of improving. So if I want to, in step 11, it's improve our conscious contact and improve, grow. You know, if I want to stay clean, then I have to do that. So as long as I do that, inevitably, but I'd never want to promise my kid. I say today I know what to do to stay clean, and I'm going to always make sure I do that, you know, so that's not going to happen again as long as I do.
Yeah.
And just try and be as honest as I can. And I think my problem with my teenager is the last couple of years of my using, I wasn't looking after him like a mum should. So I was letting him wag school and I was letting him, you know, go out with his friends and get up to all sorts. And I was off my head constantly. I didn't know what was going on, you know. And then when I come out of treatment and he suddenly then has a bedtime, he has to come in. I want to know where he's going. He's got to be at school and in lesson, and he's got to wear his uniform that never even used to be washed. Like, it's a real, real big change for a teenager. And I that has been hard.
It must be very confusing for them.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's a difficult concept for non-addicts to get their head around our experience, that is, that we didn't choose this, and that powerlessness is not an excuse, but it's still real. And it must be difficult, and it must be very difficult to deal with, I think, you know, for those people, especially if you are, it's one thing if you're an adult, it's especially hard for children. It must be very difficult, no two ways about it.
Yeah. And I'm willing to speak and answer any questions and be as honest as I can about it. And I mean, I'm very open about the fact that I'm an addict. I work a lot with different people and go on lots of meetings, and my kids know, like, Mum's got but you know, they know all about recovery, and I want them to. And, you know, one day they might need a 12-step room. Any of our children could, you know. I'm very honest about, well, I live a program that demands rigorous honesty. For me, my kids have to know, and they knew anyway because they knew what life was like. So, yeah.
Of course, this is also the right moment, I guess, to point out that there are places where you can go and get help if you're affected by this. There is Al-Anon, obviously, if you're affected by the drinking and using of someone close to you. There's Alateen, which is for teenagers and for younger people, if I get it right. And so there is help out there that is available for those specifically who are affected by our drinking and using and by our journey, even at times when we're well and we're working a good program. It doesn't mean that those people around us don't need support. And I think it's wonderful that we have all these resources out there. So Al-Anon, Alateen, for sure.
100%. And I think that's such a good point that you've made there. And like I said before, like my little girl had the support in school by people, because it does affect people. Like my son with Tucken, he's had private counselling that we paid for, because I have to accept that it's a thing that's affected then. So it'd be very selfish of me to get well.
Yeah.
But not with them any. So that is something, and I share that a lot when I speak to parents in recovery, because I think my experience of recovery is like I got well, and it was fast and it was exciting, and I was getting well, and everything was really, my experience has been nothing but amazing getting well. But obviously the people around you are still suffering, so they need that. Like, it's very easy to get caught up in this new recovery buzz, and I have to remember there's a lot of work to do, like around me. These principles in all my affairs is really key to that relationship with that power for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And a form of living amends, of course, as well.
Yeah.
Our question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
I would take them to page, is it 44? I don't want to quote page numbers and then be wrong. I would take them straight, because I don't know if someone's an addict or not, do you know? I would take them to the bit in the book. I wouldn't say it's on page 44, but I think I could possibly be wrong. Oh yeah, it is on page 44. Sorry, I'm just looking further down. So right at the top, the first chapter on page 44. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. So I'll ask someone, when you honestly want to, like you honestly had enough, can you quit entirely? And then, or if, and it's interesting, it says, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take. When you start drinking, can you control the amount you take? I'll ask them two questions. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Like, I can't tell anyone if they're an addict or not, if they don't know. There is another bit in the book that says we've got some tests that we can go out doing, go over, try and leave liquor alone for a year, or go over to your nearest bar room and start drinking, see if you can control it. And I say, until I knew, when I really tried to stop and could not, and when I really experienced that powerlessness of my sober mind taking me back to that first one no matter what, but then the powerlessness of once I put it in, not being able to stop. Like, I had to go through that bitter experience. I had to really honestly want to stop and really honestly try.
You help others to identify themselves, is what you're saying.
Yes. And not by by the questions in the book. My thinking's not right, the book's right.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't qualify anyone as anything really, but the book is really clear and really specific about this. And had I known, I don't know whether that would have made a difference, because I wasn't ready, I suppose, to surrender. But nonetheless, had I been given those guidelines, right, while I was still out there drinking and using, I couldn't have answered yes to either of those two questions, right? I was never able to control my using, and once that started, and also I could definitely not stop for a year, that's for sure. So
exactly. And and you can ask them questions and you know the answer straight away, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kirsty. Our last question, our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
At the pearly gates? What does that mean?
Yeah, as in once you pass over to the other side.
What do I want?
What do you want your higher power to say to you when you die?
Whoa, what a question. I've never thought of that, do you know? I'm happy I have ultimate trust that whatever he says, whatever he, she, it, this power says is what's meant to be said.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kirsty. Thank you so much for your courage and for talking about really difficult but such important subjects about the way we relate to children and what we do to the people, the harm that we inflict on others, and how we try to make amends today. You've been so courageous and so generous in your sharing. Thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful moment to have you here on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step Fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.